Okay, so we finished off previously with the aftermath of Bacon's rebellion. And again, I want to reemphasize that the most important legacy of this uprising is that it confirmed the planter class's growing concern that there might be a alliance, an economic alliance that could unite white indentured servants and black indentured servants. And so to prevent this from happening, the planter class in Virginia began to divide blacks and whites by enacting a series of legislation and importing African Americans. So some things they did is they began to turn away from indentured servitude to produce tobacco. And in 1705, the House of Burgesses in Virginia explicitly legalized chattel slavery, and planters began importing thousands of African laborers. Those fateful decisions committed subsequent generations of Americans to a social system that was now going to be based on racial exploitation. All right, let's move now and talk about the Puritans. We're going to talk about the Pilgrims, John Winthrop, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He will be the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Roger Williams in Rhode Island, Anne Hutchinson, religious dissidents, and eventually will close not with the Puritan Revolution in England, but actually with the Salem witchcraft trials. So if you look here, this is a Spanish Catholic mission, and this is a pulpit of a congregational meeting house, a Puritan-style church. And the difference you should notice is that they are going back to pure Christianity, and that's where they get their name, the Puritans. Enough with all this fancy gold and doctrine and the bureaucracy of the Catholic Church. They wanted to go back to the pure Christian faith. And they're also known as Congregationalists. They wanted to have very little division between the person at the pulpit and the members of the congregation. And they believed that each person for themselves should have an individual relationship with God through faith and through reading of the Bible for themselves. Now, the Puritans are originally from England, and they break from the Anglican Church. They break from the Anglican Church because they see the Anglican Church as being too similar to the Catholic Church and thereby corrupted by all the things of the world. It's too worldly. And so this migratory period is going to be after Jamestown, the 1620s through the 1640s. Now, these Puritans are sometimes known as separatists because they separated themselves from the Church of England. And King James reacted to this by giving him an option saying, listen, either leave England or we're going to kill you. So most Puritans didn't actually come to the New World. Most fled to Holland. But initially, there was a group of pilgrims and Puritans that migrated to the New World under the leadership of a man named William Bradford. And in 1620, they set sail and landed in Cape Cod, eastern Massachusetts, right here. Now, they created the first form of government, or the first constitution, known as the Mayflower Compact, and they pledged loyalty to the king, their intention to spread religion and establish a religious colony in the Massachusetts Bay Area. Now, life at Plymouth initially, right here, that's Plymouth, was terrible. Just the first winter. It's going to be easier than it was in Jamestown, but that first winter was terrible. It was defined by famine, hunger, and disease. Of the 102 migrants who arrived in November, only half survived until spring. But after that initial winter, the Plymouth colony became a healthy and thriving community. And there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, the cold temperatures in the north prevented diseases that afflicted people in the South, like malaria, which was always a problem down in Virginia. Furthermore, in 1618, there was a smallpox epidemic that killed nearly all of the local Wampanoag people in this region. So there was very few external threats and very few Indians to threaten the Puritans. So by 1640, this colony had grown to over 3,000 settlers. Meanwhile, back in England, King Charles, now the successor to King James, begins to repudiate Protestant doctrines, especially that there is grace in salvation. He wants it more fixed on works and reliance on the church. And he begins to dissolve Parliament and heads an anti-Puritan archbishop to the Church of England, who disbands hundreds of Puritan ministers from their positions. So this even fuels a more widespread migration to America, and it is in the wake of this that we get the famous John Winthrop to come over and establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, John Winthrop was a well-educated country squire who became the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he called England morally corrupt and overburdened with people, and he sought land for his children in a place where Christianity could thrive and be pure, and he wanted his community to be, as he called it, a city on a hill. And in a sermon he delivered on his way over, this is what he said his vision was for his community. We must be knit together in this work. We must uphold each other in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together. So shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. 10 of us will be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are on us. And so when he arrived, they established a government in the town of Boston, and it was a theocratic government. So the right to vote and to hold office was denied to non-church members. You had to be a Puritan. And of course, it excluded women. This only was available for men. It also barred other faiths from conducting services. And the laws of the Puritan community were based on the Bible. The Bible was the legal guide of the Puritan communities. And one legal representative of the Puritan community said, and I quote, "Where there is no law, magistrates should rule as near the law of God as they can." And so lots of things were illegal. Cheating or adultery was punishable by death. Drinking, swearing, all of this was illegal. This is going to lead to our first religious dissident from the Puritan community. It's going to be Roger Williams. Now, Roger Williams was a minister of a Puritan church in the town of Salem, and he disagreed with the blending of religion and government. In fact, he preached that magistrates had no authority in spiritual matters, and he opposed the state requirement that people belong to a congregation or to a Puritan church. He also opposed expansion into Indian lands. He believed that if you were going to take land from the Indians, you should purchase it from them legally. And so in 1636, he was banished from Salem, and he established his own home in Providence, land he bought fair and square from the Narragansett Indians. Other dissidents will settle near Portsmouth and Newport, and in 1644, Rhode Island will be given a charter and a right to govern and rule themselves. Next up is Anne Hutchinson. Now, Puritan magistrates in Massachusetts Bay also felt their authority threatened by this woman, the wife of a merchant and a mother of 7 who worked as a midwife. Now, Hutchinson held weekly prayer meetings for women in her house, and this was not something that was acceptable among the men of Massachusetts Bay. So the magistrates basically resented Hutchinson because of her sex. They believed that women were inferior to men in earthly affairs, and so instructed married women in the verse in the Bible that says, "Thy desires shall be subject to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." Magistrates also likewise denied women significant roles within the church. According to John Robinson, a Pilgrim minister, women, quote, "are debarred by their sex from ordinary prophesying and from any other dealing in the church wherein they take authority over the man." So Puritan women could not be ministers or lay preachers. They had no vote in the congregation. Well, in 1637, the magistrates put Hutchinson on trial for teaching that inward grace freed an individual from the rules of the church. Hutchinson vehemently defended her views, and even John Winthrop had to admit that she was, quote, "a woman of fierce and haughty courage," but the judges nonetheless scolded her for not attending to her, quote, "her household affairs and such things as belong to women," and found her guilty of holding heretical views. And so she was banished, and she followed Roger Williams into exile in Rhode Island. Now, while in Rhode Island, Mrs. Hutchinson had a favorable relationship with the Narragansett people there. Obviously, they had a good relationship with Roger Williams, and this convinced the Hutchinsons that most Native people were friendly towards Europeans. And this is going to turn out tragic for Mrs. Hutchinson when she moves from Rhode Island into New Netherland. Because in New Netherland, there was a hostile Indian tribe known as the Siwanoy people. And the Dutch government there mistreated these natives and basically attacked a lot of their settlements. In fact, there was a war known as Kieft's War, named after the Dutch governor, William Kieft. And so Hutchinson moved to New Netherland, and she moved there in the midst of this war, and she is going to get murdered, and her life will be cut short because of it. The story goes that she was in a town that the Siwanoy were going to attack and burn to the ground, the tiny settlement of Pelham Bay, and the Siwanoy chief Wampage had sent a warning expecting to find no settlers present. But as the Siwanoy Indians went into the village, they found at one house a family with several children, young men and women, and a woman past middle age. That would be Anne Hutchinson and her family. And when this happened, one Siwanoy Indian indicated that the Hutchinsons should restrain the family's dogs, and without any apparent fear, because the Hutchinsons trusted the Indians from previous encounters with the Narragansetts, they tied up the dogs. And then, as quickly as possible, the Siwanoy seized and scalped Francis Hutchinson, William Collins, and several servants, the two Anns, mother and daughter that you see there, and the younger children, William, Catherine, Mary, and Zariel. And as the story was later recounted in Boston, one of the Hutchinsons' daughters, quote, "seeking to escape," was caught as she was getting over a hedge, and they drew her back again by the hair of the head to the stump of a tree, and there cut off her head with a hatchet. So this is a violent death and a terrible tragedy for the Hutchinsons. Now, back in Boston, the Puritans greeted this as God's justice, further proving that she was a heretic and that these are the things that happen to people who disobey God's law. And that is going to segue us into our last part of this series, which is the Salem witch trials, where numerous people are put to death in the Puritan community of Salem for, again, religious malpractice and practicing witchcraft. So we won't pick up that here. We will pick that up in part 4 of this lecture series.